Hi guys, hope you're all well. I'm back with yet another tutorial, and the tutorial that I had in mind this time uh, was a little more complicated than some of my other tutorials. Uh, I actually came across this post from Nick Motion on Instagram, and I saw that he sort of put together this tube squeeze of sorts where there's liquid plunging out of a tube and the tube is deforming over time, and I thought like this was super cool. This looked super cool. So I decided to give this a go, and what I ended up with was something that looked like this. Uh, it's a little different to the one that Nick did, but I was really happy with how this came out. So let's just go over how I made this, and obviously I'm going to attach the scene file with the tutorial so you guys can take a look at yourselves and play around with it and let me know what you guys think. Alright, so to start off with, I just had a very basic tube model with a cap, and I think I got this from CG Trader. This was UV mapped, and the geometry on this one was really clean, so I liked it. Also, another thing to note is that this model is a thin geometry and it's not thick, so that is something that is to keep in mind, and that would be something that we need to find a workaround uh, after we've done deforming the tube. So to start off with, I just imported it into Houdini, right? And then what I did was I just remeshed this tube and I transferred the UVs on it, and I just exported it to a null. And once that was done, if I actually, so when it comes to the question of squeezing the tube, I mean, MPM was obviously the way to go, but the question was, do I want to squeeze it without the cap on, or do I want to squeeze it with the cap on? That is first, and the second one is, do I want the fluid to be simulated inside of MPM, or do I want to do it separately afterwards? And the reason why I didn't do this, the fluid with the MPM, was because I felt like one, the simulation was getting too heavy, so like I would have to wait a long time to see what actually was cooking up. And the second thing was that it's just too many values to hold on to in a single simulation. So I decided to instead do this in a separate set of simulation to make sure that I have one simulation that I was happy with, and that that I could give my time to and my attention to, and then I could use that simulation to drive the second one. So just to show you uh, what we're actually trying to do is, so this is a tube over here, and we're trying to squish it along this edge towards this edge so that it sort of it sort of forces the fluid to ooze out, right? And the most important thing for that to happen was that I needed to build something that was going to squish it. So this is just a simple cylinder that I used a mountain node on, and I used this to sort of move along the area, the surface of the tube so that it squishes it. Now, one thing to note over here was that this was not just simply translated. If I just open up the play blast for this, you'll understand this better. So this one, if you look at this play blast, what you'll notice is that the collider is actually like rolling and not just simply deforming. And the reason I did that was because if it's rolling, it has that rotational momentum that it carries, and it can sort of roll along the tube instead, if it's just translating from point A to point B, it sort of tries to drag the tube along with it. Yeah. So, as I was saying, I wanted to go with an approach which did not use an RBD sim or anything that was heavy for the system to compute. So that's why I decided to go with a tutorial that Antagma put out, and that is actually based on how you can just translate materials from A to B and use a set of nodes to make sure that they roll along the way. So yeah, that's basically what I did. I just used that tutorial and I did exactly what the Intechma guys did over there. And I just had this cylinder sort of roll along the ground. And this is actually what I used for my MPM collider, right? As you can see over here. So this is what roll on the ground, and this was set to obviously animated and deforming. Now, for my MPM source, what I did was I used the preset metal, and the two things that I played around with are the plasticity and the viscosity, right? I didn't think I touched anything else except for I think I just lowered my stiffness a little bit. Other than that, it was pretty straightforward, and once I was done with that one, this is the result that I got. Now the problem with this result was that if I just play this around again, you'll see that this looks, one, this is way too fast. Two, there's a lot of jitter that's going on in the simulation, and that was, I mean, I tried to solve it, but I probably think this is because of the high number of substeps that were being used by the MPM solver, and if I try to restrict the substeps, uh, the simulation would sort of, just break and it would crash onto itself. So I had to find a way to, post-process this simulation after it was, done caching. So the way that I did was that I used a time blend node, and I use that time blend node to sort of slow the simulation down by uh, 1/4 of it, right? So and like once that was done, the result that it gave me was pretty good. Now once I was done baking the simulation out, what I ended up doing was I just simply imported that simulation in again, and I used a point deform on the remesh geometry that I had made over here, right? And with that point deform, the result that I got was something that looked like this. So this looked like really, really nice to me, the way it was squishing and squeezing, and you got that deformations on different pieces of the tube, and the way that it sort of just dragged the tube along the way, and the tail sort of lifted up. I just really liked how this came out, right? Now, I'll explain all of this a little later on. But for now, the next step uh, in the whole process was to actually calculate or to find a way where I could sort of deform the cap along with the tube that is being squeezed, right? So here you can see it, right? The cap does not follow around with it. Now, what I ended up doing for the cap was I just simply used a point deform node, right? And I just imported the squish tube that I had over here, and I used the original geometry for the cap, and I just if I just show that to you, I just simply used a point deform. Now, what that point deform was doing over here was once the tube starts to deform, actually you'll see over here it sort of deformed the cap along with it, right? And that was not okay. And for that, what I did was I just stored this animation of the cap, right? And I used an extract transform node to copy this exact like translation based animation onto the original cap geometry. And once I did that, I got the original geometry, right? And this geometry was moving along with the tube, but the problem with this one was that there was actually no like it was not behaving dynamically, right? And because it was not behaving dynamically, it did not end up looking good, right? So I had to find a way out where I could use this simulation to actually drive the deformation of the cap. And for that, what I did was I just exported this transform cap out, right? And I just re-imported this back in, right? And once I re-imported this in, what I did was I just so over here I imported the singular cap in as well, right? The non-animated one, and I just split this cap into three groups. So I just selected this ridge in between, and I split this cap with the this being the lid, this being the cap, and this being the ridge, right? And I just split the ridge, right, from the cap and the lid, right? And it gave me this, right? And I'm just making a group over here, right? And in this current split, you'll see that all of this is animated. And what I did was, so the important thing to note over here was that this part is not going to be deformed. This is actually going to be deformed. And the deformation of this is going to be dependent on the ridge that is connecting these two, right? So what I did was I removed any sort of animation that was on this lid, right? And I was going to use the cap as a collider, right? And the ridge over here was also static, so there was no animation on the ridge. And I know a lot of people's intuition would be to accomplish this with RBD simulations, and I tried it, believe me, but I was not able to get the desired result that I wanted. So what I instead ended up doing was that I ended up using a Vellum system, right? So I'll just go over this. This is not going to be a Vellum explanation video. Like you'll find lots of videos on the internet that explain what I'm doing over here. I'll just go over the settings really quickly. So I just use a cloth constraint for the ridge, and the stiffness was set up really high. The bendiness of the ridge was set up really high, and I use a shape match for my lid, right? And because I did not want it to deform a lot over the time, and I used a glue constraint to sort of attach the ridge with the lid. And after that, I just use an attach to geometry to connect the ridge to the cap, which was you be using as a collider. And once that was done, what I ended up with was something that looked like this, right? Now you can see that this does not look anywhere near what it should look like, right? But the fun thing is that once I exported all of this out, right, and used a point deform again on the original cap, I got something which looked super nice, right? It looked super nice. And because this was a low poly geometry, once I subdivided this, right, once I subdivided this, it looked absolutely amazing, right? So, and if I just play the combined simulation for the squeeze and the cap, you'll see that now this looks like it's coming together. Yep, good. Now, moving on. The last thing that is left for this simulation to be dealt with in is the flip. Now, remember how I told you that this part I was gonna come back to this part later. So the important thing to understand now is that there were actually two ways I could have simulated this in, right? The first was going to be if I filled the whole tube up with flip particles, and then I used those flip particles to be squeezed out of the tube. But the problem that I was coming across with in that approach was, first of all, I needed to build a collider which was extremely high in resolution, which would slow things down. And secondly, I was sort of not getting the expected squeeze on the flip particles, if that makes sense. So, I had to find a way to sort of push them out myself. And in that manner, I ended up with a lot of collision problems, with a lot of the sim being unstable, me using a lot of steps, so it just did not make sense. The other way was if I could just simply use this cap, oops, if I could just simply use this cap over here, right? And I could animate a flip source along with it and just place an emitter inside of this hole, right? So it did not show up in the simulation, but you would get that squeeze. Now, that all said and done, the the problem I saw coming with that is, so you see how this tube is being squished along the time, right? And the squeeze on the tube should actually have an effect on the emitter squeezing out, right? And that is something that I had to figure out. Now, the problem with flip emitters is that, at least this is what I've tried, as much as I've tried, is that you cannot actually control how fast or how slow the emission was happening, right? I did my research on it. I just could not find a way out. If there's someone on the internet that knows how to do this, please hit me up and let me know. But I could not figure this out on my own. So I could not control the emission of the flip particles, right? So that way, that in that manner, I had to figure another way out. So what I instead ended up doing was, if I could somehow, instead of controlling the emission of the fluid, if I could control the speed of the fluid, right? And that is exactly what this is for. So what over here I'm doing is that I took this deformation gradient that I got from MPM Solver, right? And I purely used ChatGPT for this. It was amazing with this one. And what I did was I just used a simple pressure formula, right? That ChatGPT gave me. Yeah. So as I was saying, I just used this deformation gradient from my MPM simulation, and I just used a simple vex code that ChatGPT gave me, right? And I used that to give me the pressure that was actually being calculated via this deformation gradient on each point, right? And once I did that, what I ended up doing was I converted this pressure into a gradient through a measure node, right? And this was still on points level. Once that was done, what I ended up doing was that I simply converted this pressure gradient into a force, right? And I multiplied this with the factor of force scale that I created over here, and I just set that to 1. But I just used that so that, I could control it, have control over it afterwards. And once that was done, because force is a vector, I converted it back into a float. And what that gave me was something that looked like this. So this was basically giving me magnitude of the force all over the tube, right? And once that was done, I just simply converted this point attribute into a detail attribute so that it could give me a singular value throughout the whole simulation for how much force was being used, right? Now, this is a value that I could, if somehow connect to my flip simulation, I would be able to control the emission of sorts, or the speed of the emission, right? Now I just have to figure a way out how can I, use this value to control the emission. Also, another thing that I did was I just remapped my force magnitude over here from 0 to 600,000, from to 0 to 1, right? And I just exported this out, and I just baked this out like as a cache, right? Now, coming over for my flip source, it was exactly the same technique as I used for the cap deformation over here. Instead, I just used a sphere, right? And if I show you um, over here, you'll see that the it's just a sphere that is basically just following the cap along the way, right? Now, and I just use a standard flip source node over here, and for this to happen, what I did was I used the same hierarchical tree that I used over here, and I just used it to create this cylindrical sort of column made out of lines. And I use that column to sort of follow along where the emitter was, mm, over here, right? And this way, what I could do is I could convert this column of lines into a volume velocity and use this volume velocity to sort of drive the simulation. And that is how I was, and this like the drive of this was actually being controlled by, so I copied the force magnitude that I created up there onto this set of lines, and I use this force mag to sort of basically drive my normals. So if I turn my normals on, you'll see that my normals are being uh, animated over time, right? And this is actually how I was controlling the speed of my emission. And then I just simply converted my normals and I just simply transferred my normals to a volume, and that gave me this volume velocity, right? And this was just driving my flip. Now, if I come over to my flip simulation, there's not a lot of complications that I did with this. I just simply used a viscosity. I simply used a swirly function, and I had viscosity on, and I used slip-on collision, and my number of substeps were 3 and 6. The time scale was 1, and the particle separation was something like this, and the grid scale was 1.5. The viscosity I think was set around 150, and I think that was about it. Yeah, yeah, I think that was about it. And yeah, and another thing that I ended up doing in this simulation was for my meshing, I actually used the upres grain function that ships with Houdini. So, I could sort of upres the particle count that I had on my simulation. And over here, what you'll find is that I set up a bubble solver over here as well, so that you could actually, if you want, you could use the bubbles. You could have some bubbles inside of your fluid. There you go. So and this was also suggested by Entagma. So this also is really good. And yeah, when I put all of that together, this is what I ended up with. Yeah. And yeah, that's about it. So let me know, guys, what you think about this one. If there are any questions, please comment. And I would appreciate it if you would drop a like and subscribe to my channel for more tutorials coming on. Thank you.